If you have an open mind that permits you to objectively view reality, then this book is for you. Ignorance is no excuse. Chapter 1. The Natural. The natural represents that of nature. The word nature comes from Latin natura, course of things, natural character, constitution, quality, the universe. By the mid-14th century as the forces or processes of the material world, that which produces living things and maintains order. From the late 14th century as creation, the universe, or heredity, birth, hereditary circumstance, essential qualities, inherent constitution, innate disposition, initial character. Some sources detail how the word comes from Egyptian Necher, meaning God, symbolized hieroglyphically as a simple styled flag on a pole, which represented a force that was known to exist through its observable effects, but difficult or impossible to see with the eye. Nature was actually pronounced extremely close to the English pronunciation of nature. Nature may be wholly defined as the phenomena of the physical world collectively, including plants, animals, the landscape, and other features and products of the earth, as opposed to humans or human creations. From post-Romantic philosophy, Rousseau, Romanticism, Transcendentalism, Muir, Christianity, Mill, etc., as the whole of material reality, considered as independent of human activity and history. From Stoicism, Atomism, Epicurism, Taoism, Descartes, Bacon, Spinoza, Aristotle, Mill, etc., as the whole universe, as it is the place, the source, and the result of material phenomena, including man, or at least man's body. From Heraclitus, Hegel, Nietzsche, Darwin, vitalism, etc., as the specific force at the core of life and change. Also from Aristotle, Mill, etc., as the essence, inner quality, and character, the whole of specific physical properties of an object, live or inert. Therefore, among these definitions, the macro, whole world view of nature would be the all, or that which contains all that is natural, whereas the micro, parts of the whole world view of nature would be looking at the individual natures, that of which is natural within nature. The essential understanding for what is considered of nature based on our definitions is viewing nature through the lens of time. While everything within nature, the micro, is constantly changing, nature, the macro, stays the same. If nature is the constitution, birth, or initial character, the source or God that is core to change itself, then the natural must be what has always existed, being that it is of nature. The natural is then an alignment to nature, the present aligned to the ever-present, the micro aligned to the macro. This relates to the common notion of the universal and timeless natural law, or the law of nature, which is seen as the inescapable or immutable. It cannot be changed, even if attempted or justified otherwise. For ourselves to understand this law, we come to follow it, rather than violate it in the attempt to disobey. Nature may be likened to a self-operating machine, for which we are one of the gears placed within that may work with the machine. This worldview upon all things places scrutiny and question for if they are remaining natural, of nature. For instance, we may ask ourselves if human beings are creating things which have not always existed. Even our own very selves are not permanent or timeless. When we compare ourselves and our creations, micro, to our natural world, the creation, macro, we come to understand the man-made and unnatural as opposed to the natural. Change, time, and nature itself must too be evaluated by the natural and unnatural. For instance, the change that always exists as opposed to change that humans create, or the time that always exists as opposed to the time that humans create, or the nature that always exists as opposed to nature that humans create. Whatever we accept or embrace within our lives, we assume as natural to exist and therefore natural to persist. This gives us the simple equation: what is natural to exist is what is natural to persist. People may assume everything is natural if it exists or can exist. However, you must merely ask yourself one question: why does it exist? In the same ways an individual may attempt to disregard morality is the same ways an individual may attempt to disregard the concept of the natural versus unnatural. Just because something naturally occurs does not mean it is natural to exist. And just because something is natural to exist does not mean it is natural to use. Morality, that concerning what is right and wrong, is the very distinction between the natural and unnatural. This distinction must be, since human beings cannot decide to go against the constitution of life. They cannot choose to go against nature. Human beings can only attempt to violate nature, but since they did not create nature itself, they have no power to actually change it. What humans have power over are their own creations and themselves, the micro. Just because human beings are created within the world does not make them unnatural. As far as our own comprehension may seek, the creation of ourselves, or beings as a whole, has always existed. In the same way, the trees grow and give birth. We cannot change the fact humans exist, and we have long existed, as even perhaps in different forms. We cannot speak wholly of nature, for we are only part. Therefore, we may not fully comprehend ourselves or our world, but that does not mean we don't try and learn our place. It however means that we recognize a sense of humility and mystery as with our need for constant learning. We are given humanity by nature, the ability to breathe, to learn, to create, and much more. It is our choice of what to do with what we are given. It is the ability of choice which makes us free, and it equally makes us powerful, especially when we know what choices we make. Time is important because time tells all truth, and time heals all wounds. Therefore, in the case we do wrong to ourselves or our world, nature helps us learn. If we are willing to learn or not, nature will teach us one way or another. This has been said to be karma, natural law, the law of attraction, the golden rule, the moral law, and many other names through many different microcultures and peoples all observing an ever similar macro nature. When we attain knowledge, we attain an understanding of natures. When we attain an understanding of natures, we may better live with nature. Every thought is a question, and every person's life is at question, while nature is the answer. Of the countless quotes, the following quotes are from Socrates, a founding father of philosophy, not of government. This helps encapsulate much of this text. There is only one good, knowledge, and one evil, ignorance. To find yourself, think for yourself. To know is to know you know nothing. That is the meaning of true knowledge. I cannot teach anybody anything. I can only make them think. Strong minds discuss ideas. Average minds discuss events. Weak minds discuss people. He who is not contented with what he has would not be contented with what he would like to have. If you don't get what you want, you suffer. If you get what you don't want, you suffer. Even when you get exactly what you want, you still suffer because you can't hold on to it forever. Your mind is your predicament. It wants to be free of change, free of pain, free of the obligations of life and death. But change is law, and no amount of pretending will alter that reality. Everyone wants to tell you what to do and what's good for you. They don't want you to find your own answers, they want you to believe theirs. The easiest and noblest way is not to be crushing others, but to be improving yourselves. No man is capable of causing great evil without thinking he's doing the right thing. In understanding morality and the concept of nature, we must also examine word usage. Every word we use is representative for an idea, a particular nature that becomes more definitive the clearer our definition is. However, since the word definition means to limit or prescribe, and being that we create words, the definitions are prone to change and several words may define the same idea. Therefore, the goal is not to get stuck on words, but rather to always seek for context and intent. There are many words and word variations related to that of natural, nature, or right, rightful, and that may include honest, honesty, health, healthy, truth, truthful, real, really, just, justice, standard, genuine, moral, morality, regular, correct, sensible, reasonable, unforced, fundamental, whole, or essential. Whereas the words related to that of unnatural, denature, denatured, or wrong, wrongful may include dishonest, dishonesty, unhealthy, unhealthiness, untruth, untruthful, unreal, not really, fake, artificial, illusory, illusion, unjust, injustice, immoral, immorality, abnormal, aberrational, forced, pretended, feigned, contrived, or incorrect. The similarities among these words also further proves their close correlations. We may further realize that we cannot escape these terms in our day-to-day lives, as because we are always making choices for ourselves. With knowledge, we know what we are really doing, and therefore we know how our nature interacts with the nature of the world around us. Furthermore, we may replace the word really with the word naturally, or the words really good with the words naturally natural, or the word sad with more unnatural, or even the word good with happy. Disputes upon the similarities may help us see why these different words exist in the very first place. We could choose to make new words for the same meanings, but why wouldn't we use the same words unless we felt as if they do not fulfill a certain meaning, a certain nature? These reasons all explain as to why naturosophy exists as a term and philosophy. To know what we are doing in life, nature, is to have an answer, and equally so, purpose, intent, reason, meaning, no confusion, clarity, and direction. If we ensure that what we are doing is natural, then the direction we go, we know. What we sow, we know. Do we only learn about what is natural through time? Would nature not give us other signs or warnings? Time tells us all truth and all natures in their respective time and place, as because nature and its laws constitutes order. It is again the Constitution. Therefore, when you ask upon what is not just natural to exist, but also what is natural to use or occur, always take into consideration that nature will tell you through time coming to affect your own very existence, usage, and occurrences, forming effects. Not everyone will look at macro nature this deeply, as among looking at every micro nature within. However, people partake in this learning every day just as much as they use the terms. As you learn, you come to know. As you feed yourself, you come to grow. Inversely, as you do not learn, you come to be ignorant. As you do not feed yourself, you malnourish. As you invest in whatever you choose, you attract and come to achieve. If an individual thinks of the unnatural as natural, so they will follow its path. This path or direction is effect to effect, nurture to nature, continuously. The natural supports nature, whereas the unnatural supports the denatured. Another way to be said, effects may either be naturalizing, natural right for naturalization, nature naturalized, or denaturing, unnatural wrong for denaturalization, denaturalized, denatured. Being that all that is unnatural is that not of nature, not real, not truthful, it can only be attempted into existence. Time will show that the unnatural cannot persist without taking a toll on the natural that lives underneath, that allowed its very existence. A simple formula may be recognized. The naturalizing supports or gives to the natural, whereas the denaturing violates or steals from the natural. If we embraced the underlying foundation, being the natural nature, this would be much akin to embracing the way of nature, or the Tao, as mentioned in Taoism and the Tao Te Ching. The unnatural can only take from nature, it cannot create anything new. Even when it attempts to create something new, it really hasn't, hence the definition of illusory. However, seeing the unnatural requires knowledge of the natural. The very terms unnatural and natural would not exist if it weren't for some sense of detachment or unalignment to our world. If an individual were to say natural nature, it is redundant in the context that nature is always nature, unless it can sometimes not be, but it always is. Therefore, the natural or natural law simply is nature, being that it is what consists of nature. The nature of all denaturing or evil alike is to create the unnecessary or the distraction. If individuals are unable to see this, they permit the unnatural as if it is natural. They embrace what will come to be a world of confusion or the unknown. Every lie is a distorted truth. It makes truth no longer truth, and following it always leads to confusion. To rather be honest allows the truth to express, always leading to knowledge. In the macro scale, a world of consistent, persistent, or aggregate naturalization will allow evolution, progress, optimization, generation, and sustainability. Whereas a world of consistent, persistent, or aggregate denaturalization will create regret, stagnation, extinction, loss, and degeneration. Being able to live life and therefore allow life is one where you need not create more. You already have much, you embrace or recognize nature, the infinite. The natural comes natural, the Tao is embraced. The man-made in this light may seem by default unnatural, as it certainly is not the most natural or infinite. It is not more of nature, it is more of man. However, man will always create, as it is also in his nature. His creations, with the knowledge of nature applied, can have natural or naturalizing effects, helping us understand that just because something is not natural to exist does not mean it is not natural to use. Therefore, man should not depend upon his creations if he knows their limited nature or their very dependency, man and nature itself. Creations reflect the creator and creation, and the creator reflects creation in other creators. With dependency onto our creations, we may lose touch with creation itself and create loss despite how much we created to gain. What was to be complementary becomes supplementary. To truly gain or win for that of nature, you may need to lose that of the man-made. This paradox in more being less, or in the man-made not being truly fulfilling, is recognizing the way of nature in naturalization. It is important to know that one can take without stealing, and every choice we make, as it is our answer, it is equally a taking. Stealing is taking something that does not naturally belong to you. It violates ownership. If we do something that is out of place or not for the right time, we must further our alignment to nature, to time and place, so to make wise choices. In any case, nature helps to bring us back to focus, on track, and at a balance, order, and harmony. It must, since it is the constitution we cannot avoid. It is the birth born ever before our birth. To have dependency assumes in the very first place that it is essential or natural to your living. If you do not know how to live without a man-made stove, without man-made food, without a man-made drug, or any other thing, you accept the premises that it is natural to your nature and to your life. When we long accept the unnatural and it becomes our aggregate reality, nature may seem distant and unclear until it becomes no longer. Therefore, even if it seems like we have lost the natural, it is only because of the presence of the unnatural, like a veil of darkness covering the light. The light is still there but being suppressed and therefore lacking in function. If man creates the problem, then equally so, man can get rid of it. For another simple equation, we may understand that when we think, say, or act from knowledge or embrace of nature, we do so for naturalizing. Whereas, when we think, say, or act from the lack or disregard, or ignorance of the natural, by man-made authority, we do so for denaturing. Effects can also be seen through the lens of time, because humans may need the naturally wrong for them to use to learn what is naturally right for them to use, and they cannot persist in doing what is wrong too long. Indeed, there are natural problems in the world in relation to humans, such as poisonous plants or mistaken behavior, but those may always exist and are essential for learning. The fault is not on nature, but on man if human beings have the nature to learn and align to nature. Trying to put nature in any box or limited perspective, even if it makes sense, is often the very problem, and there are endless perspectives upon nature. Everything that man creates is encapsulating some part of nature and using it in ways according to man's own will. If man should attempt to alter or supplement nature, creating dependency onto it or him, this creates man-made authority. The word authority implies what should be followed or obeyed. If man is complementing nature with his creation and recognizing its faults and natural roots, creating naturalizing effects with no dependency unto it, it would be to respect natural authority. This is much like keeping oneself in their own place, their own control. They belong to themselves, they own themselves. The authority and time and place is where it should be. This is much like creating something to reflect or express oneself, realizing that it is not oneself wholly. The identity or thing is not the natural individual. No unnatural attachment shall be made. In light of natural authority, for individual sovereignty, self-mastery, self-control, ruler of self, is coming to know that we each may assist each other for further learning, as because we all have something to share, being that we are each unique of our own observations and experiences. If we know our boundaries, then we help others but do not transgress or violate upon them. In practice for that of this shared pursuit for knowledge, as our individual selves come together, we may recognize that every nature has a nature of its own, and therefore we must ask ourselves what consists of such a nature. There is no only one way to seek out the constitution or nature of anything. However, let us learn of one optional method which may be called the nature dynamic. You start with thinking of something. It can be anything, simple or complex. Once you have it in your mind or written down, you break it down with the following procedures. Your answers replace the word nature in the brackets. The simple or true nature. What is the intended use or function? For nature. The base nature. What are the requirements? From nature. The core nature. What is it made of? Of nature. The second nature. The second simple natures. What are the impacts or effects? Can be the nature of nature. Optional descriptives. The general nature. What is the type or form? A nature. The higher nature. What is the greater simple nature? For a nature. Another method for learning the nature of anything or how it can be shared can be found by reading Nature's Radical Honesty, a practical application of naturosophy. As this is all a practice within naturosophy, we are all ever practicing within life. Understanding the nature of anything may best be known by reading Sapientia Naturae, the guidebook. These dynamics and topics will be used in the following chapters to help create an example diagnosis, dia-gnosis by way of knowledge, or analysis of that which humanity has partaken in for many years, affecting them in many ways. In conclusion, understanding nature is coming to also understand ourselves. We learn what to create with what has been created. We give birth with what has given birth. The word genus is Latin for birth, like gene, give birth. Nature from natus or nasi, birth, born, to be born. Homo sapien is the genus of human beings, for which Homo sapere means man being wise, alike human from Latin humanus, humane, gentle, learned. We may want to ask ourselves if we are allowing wisdom, if we are learning, if we are giving birth to that which goes against birth. It is all the matter of the way we take in our lives, what world we are creating or contributing toward. Is nature and hence its knowledge in the aggregate, or is it being veiled off by a darkness, a lie, or deception in the aggregate? If you care about nature, inquire about your way. When we say of nature is that which is natural, the word of also means away or away from, and therefore it means away from nature, but indeed it is a way. The word from may also mean forward, which means before, toward, bringing in the aspect of time once more, providing more perspective and the never-ending etymology of words. Everything we do may be away from nature, but the question is, how far will we go and in what way? It is nature which is the given reality, which is why following it is merely living it, allowing it. If we want life, we must live. We are among each other in this life. We must live with each other, and therefore let each other live. Chapter 2. Government. The concept of government is the concept of authority. It is what tells people what they must obey, or else punishment will be done unto them. If a government is not given to us by nature, then that would make it man-made government. It would be man-made authority. Since the authority, law, or government of nature is already present everywhere and at all times, the idea of natural law, natural authority, or natural government would simply be negated, as it is just nature. Therefore, the terms of law, authority, and governments are usually in reference to the man-made constructs. Governments call their rules as laws, and may even call their guidelines for laws as constitutions, your birth in their system as naturalization, their presence as the state, their necessary existence for order. As differing from organizations or businesses, governments use violence against those who do not comply with its rules, its laws. This makes government by definition involuntary, meaning that individuals cannot freely choose to live without government. Violence is also known as initiatory force or aggression, a violation upon nature, and involuntary action. Governments claim to control large portions of land, including everything within that land. All the people, businesses, and organizations must submit to the rule of government. While this may relate to a criminal organization, a gang, or mafia enforcing its own commands, governments are not perceived in the same way. Governments may commit immoral or unnatural acts just as they do, but be seen as moral or natural for having done so, as because they are perceived to be authority. Whereas a criminal gang may commit immoral acts and people would see them as immoral. In a gang, the victims may comply, but not out of any moral or natural obligation to obey, rather merely out of fear. If the victims were given the chance to resist, they would do so without feeling the slightest guilt. The victims know that the situation they are in is not natural for their condition, and in order to maintain their nature, they must defend it against any and all aggressors or violators. The victims do not assume the gang to be rightful or legitimate rulers and authority which they must obey for the greater good. Yet, if they did, that would be government. The concept of authority or government is the idea that some people have the moral right to use violence in controlling other people. In other words, it is the belief that some people have the natural nature to use violence while others cannot, allowing them to be above or exempted from basic morality and nature. It may be said as the belief that someone can be above nature's government, law, or authority. Government must be involuntary and based on belief, or else nature would be the only government to embrace. Deception through lying and ignorance and violence would be required to attempt to make it otherwise. Quote, "The naturalizing supports or gives to the natural, whereas the denaturing violates or steals from the natural." End quote. To claim to be above human beings in all the land would be claiming to be nature itself, as it is what constitutes and controls the world at large by definition. This would make government the epiphany of man-made authority, the attempt to make man as God. If an individual wanted to alter or denature all of nature, they cannot do so unless they created a system in artificial imitation of it. It would require that they attempt to keep hidden and suppress the systems of nature, hence why systems of natural law may at times be considered occult or hidden. It would require people contributing to the creation of such a system by their own belief in its necessity, assuming that it is natural. It would require the unnatural justifying the unnatural, so to seemingly strengthen and further legitimize its existence. Governments make violence legitimate, natural to nature, yet violence is directly a violation of nature. If individuals are born into such a system and see that as nature, as it is what they must embrace, it would appear to make an unnatural system seemingly natural. The mere identity or belief in authority cannot change the nature of morality or the nature of nature, and therefore what is natural or unnatural, right or wrong. In other words, a wrong cannot become a right, and the unnatural cannot become natural. An individual in natural ownership of himself cannot be owned by another. A belief insinuates that it is unfounded in knowledge. It is not known to be real. The belief in authority is the belief in government, but it has also been said as the belief in the right to rule, that someone can be not a leader, but a ruler. It has been called the most dangerous superstition by Larkin Rose, the biggest religion, creating the only divide by Mark Passio, where to put an end to it would be the end of all evil by Jeremy Locke. It is to order follow, ignoring your own natural conscience or individual decision-making, so to ignore nature and give way to every evil's growth to its aggregate. The controversial and shocking psychological studies known as the Stanley Milgram experiment and the Stanford Prison experiment proves the danger of this belief system. In the Stanley Milgram experiment, the average person of any demographic was willing to torture their fellow man just because an authority figure told them to do so. They would then attempt to give away their own responsibility and place the blame on the victim or the order giver, when they were the ones who actively carried out the order. The common excuse is, "I was just following orders," as if it is not in their nature to think for themselves what is right and wrong, or as if they weren't acting as their self. In other words, it is an attempt to give away one's own nature. If it's not with them, who is it with? This is the importance in knowing thyself. Very few individuals were willing to say no because they know. They were mentally strong enough to disobey authority because of morality, natural authority. The reason for there being only few individuals doing this can heavily be attributed to the government schooling system, which is commonly designed to teach authority, or legality as morality itself, just as it would be to say that man-made authority is natural authority itself. It is not in our nature to be obedient slaves or subjects, for which is why chattel slavery was abolished in the 19th century by the spread of knowledge or moral suasion in the efforts of abolitionists, and why slaves or subjects must believe and be trained into their own slavery or subjugation with ignorance and violence for it to be maintained. This also explains why many of the order followers were laughing with insecurity and nervousness in the experiments because they were feeling uncontrollable of themselves. With the Stanford Prison experiment, average individuals of well-respected demographics were given the role of guard, becoming an authority figure for a prison. Within just a matter of days, their rulership became tyrannical and cruel that the experiment had to be ended because they embraced the identity of authority and put themselves above their fellow man in nature and rights. These individuals would then come out of the experiment to talk about how they never expected to do what they did, how they couldn't believe that they acted in such a manner. Therefore, it shall be known that humans cannot continually act like a monster without eventually becoming one. The unnatural gives way to the unnatural, and what we embrace, we give way to. One cannot assume governments naturally occur, just as one should not assume slavery naturally occurs just because it is something long in our existence that we are born into and propagandized into thinking its supposed necessity. These same experiments prove to demonstrate that an individual can refuse to be a prison guard or refuse to be an order follower, however, on the basis that they know they shouldn't. Quote, "When we think, say, or act from knowledge or embrace of nature, we do so for naturalizing, whereas when we think, say, or act from the lack or disregard or ignorance of the natural by man-made authority, we do so for denaturing." End quote. Another common excuse is the idea that government is a necessary evil. However, this amounts to saying that the unnatural is natural. With this phrase, it's not even insinuating that evil is unknown or not clearly evil. It is explicitly saying it is evil, that it is unnatural. For what reason do we have to call it evil if we also say it is necessary? Then this would be putting the blame on nature. It would be to say nature cannot be embraced without man's creation, nonetheless an immoral creation in both existence and usage. What has already been shared will not be enough for the individual attached to their long-held and ingrained belief, because understanding nature equally requires introspection into ourselves. May you answer the following questions by Larkin Rose, author of The Most Dangerous Superstition. Number 1. Is there any means by which any number of individuals can delegate or give to someone else the moral right, natural nature, to do something which none of the individuals have the moral right, natural nature, to do themselves? Number 2. Do those who wield political power, presidents, legislators, etc., have the moral right, natural nature, to do things which other people do not have the moral right, natural nature, to do? If so, from whom and how did they acquire such a right, nature? Number 3. Is there any process, constitutions, elections, legislation, by which human beings can transform an immoral or unnatural act into a moral or natural act without changing the act itself? Number 4. When lawmakers and law enforcers use coercion and force, denaturing, in the name of law and government, do they bear the same responsibility for their actions that anyone else would who did the same thing on his own? Number 5. When there is a conflict between an individual's own moral or natural conscience and the commands of a political authority, is the individual morally, naturally obligated to do what he personally views as wrong, unnatural, in order to obey the law? Upon these questions, you may easily notice the terminology used. For instance, the delegation or granting of natures insinuates that man can rule over other individuals, assuming the place of nature. One can believe that they are now king or any other title, no matter how many others believe it is true, but they are still just a human being, subject to the same natural world as everyone else. Political power, being in the endless belief-based forms such as legislation, lawmakers, law enforcers, or presidents, are all temporary or non-timeless and non-universal constructs not found in nature. Yet, humans attach themselves to these as if they are, where to not do so, you may be perceived as immoral or unorderly. If one follows the idea of some sense of equality in nature, based on understanding that although we have different experiences, we are all born in the same way, of the same species, in the same world, then the granting or revoking belief-based political games or different forms of slavery are not assisting in this mere embrace of knowledge. One may even be aware of potential problems partaking in government affairs themselves, and so they lie to themselves in ways so to justify it, then coming to learn over time, wondering how they ever could have become or contributed to the corrupt or denatured. This is the politician running for the people. It's the unnatural titled natural person believing in the unnatural system and using it against the unnatural system as mere symptom management, for which the roots are found only with nature. The man-made can never truly fulfill, as people will see how it never lasts. The limited government is merely limited violence, where the unnatural or immoral is still being justified, so it will aggregate to tyranny or dictatorship once again until it falls by its own chaos, as disharmony with nature grows ever more clear with time. It's the power itself that is unnatural. No man is supposed to be in a position higher than their fellow man. Therefore, whether you change the individual or what that individual does, it does not matter and will never truly bring good or the natural so long as the position of that individual is within itself unnatural or immoral, justified as if it's natural. Especially starting with the basis of an unnatural aggregate, governments claiming control over everything will then come to corrupt economy, culture, and everything within to the deepest essence, the longer it is permitted. All that would otherwise be natural becomes unnatural, for which is why government is the most dangerous belief against nature. It is the most dangerous to nature. Once all has been corrupted or denatured, complete political slavery or centralized control has been manifest. In politics, even the idea of running for others does not account to a natural action, because nobody can run for you. In the same way, your vote is not your voice, and it is just another attempt to make you feel personally connected to the idea of government as if it is a business or organization based on consent, which it is not, or that it is nature, which is necessary, which it is not. No majority or minority can make the unnatural natural, and in the same way, it is unnatural for one or many people to impose their opinion or will on any individual because they are not nature nor the individual. Have your opinions and respect others' opinions. Simply do not impose it as truth backed by violence. Voluntary consensual interaction is natural, as we all have the ability to choose what to do with our own lives with our own freedom. This is why businesses and organizations, voluntary hierarchies will always exist. We also do not assume that one business or organization should be set for all of time or for everybody as they are, whether they like it or not, or that there is one perfect form. When they start to act like a government, people are often naturally averted because they want to maintain control of their own life. In promotion of voluntary or natural interactions, the word and concept of voluntarism has been created. When government does not act like government, the only way is if it isn't government, it isn't involuntary. Your life and freedom naturally provides possibility and choice. Applying voluntary interaction is applying a rule in your life. In the same way, you may apply the non-aggression principle, the idea that you should never initiate violence upon another. Similarly, recognizing ownership and property is a rule. These are rules based on respecting nature to prevent the unnatural. These are not rulers. Rulers, another word for that of authority or government, imply persons being the rule. They proclaim to be the sole source of rules, and therefore proclaiming that they are nature. Therefore, in government, it is not the rules that must be obeyed, it's actually the rulers. In reality, we are each the rulers of ourselves, and we may guide or assist each other in the shared pursuit of nature or happiness, but we cannot dictate or command others, as we cannot live other people's lives or forcibly make people live the way we want them to. People will always create rules for others, but nobody is under any natural or moral obligation to obey by the threat of violence. If they were, that would be government, that would be political slavery. The whole concept of slavery is built upon the idea that you do not own what you own, that you cannot choose how to live your own life, that instead of interactions being based on consent, you need permission to exercise your nature by authority. If you need permission to be free, then you are not free. If government would be built upon consent, if it were not slavery, then it must not be government. It is the equivalent of an individual treating man or government as God, begging for their own ability or existence by authority, and that it may even be written down as commandments called laws alongside its symbols and rituals, many of which may be used to appeal to and further manipulate people subconsciously. Many of the abolitionists of the 19th century also understood this, for which is why they used the government of God for moral suasion as an argument against chattel slavery and all forms of human authority. They were called radical, a word meaning roots, grounded, essential, or going to the origin, as they opposed political change, being that it was also opposed to nature's government and backed by violence. Among them was William Lloyd Garrison, Lysander Spooner, Aidan Ballou, Henry Clark Wright, Ezra Heywood, Josiah Warren, Charles Lane, Henry David Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Jeremiah Hacker, William Batchelder Greene, Stephen Pearl Andrews, and many more thereafter their time, such as Leo Tolstoy and Benjamin Tucker. Today, these individuals would be considered voluntarists, against man-made government. The truth as to the natural nature of voluntarism as opposed to government will only grow in time. For now, there are many more voluntarists than there were then. People only have one source to obey, and that is nature. An individual can personally choose to not obey nature in every aspect of their life and still practice voluntarism, but they would not support a government. They are not claiming to be nature itself. Therefore, the risks they take are of their own nature, and they still recognize natural authority in the aggregate. Similarly, an individual who does potential wrong or denaturing to himself may be said to be partaking in a vice, whereas an individual who does wrong or denaturing to others may be said to be partaking in a real crime. Nobody is perfect, nor makes perfect decisions. We all must learn from nature together and help others do the same. To say that men must be angels in order for no government is to say men must be perfectly natural, which is impossible by definition. However, to say that humans are not angels, for which is why none are fit to rule, is to say men are not perfectly natural, which is why they must ever continually strive to be, by learning from nature, and nobody inherently is the authority which is. Election after election, man-made creation after man-made creation, and yet man is never fulfilled. As the quote from Francis Bacon states, "Nature to be commanded must be obeyed." In the whole process of acquiring a nature or right bound for oneself, How else will one achieve that other than by nature or with nature, strengthening or aggregating natures which already exist? Attempting to create a new nature is akin to attempting to create a new species, and then people wonder why others compare them to vampires, sheep, or zombies. By people believing in others as naturally higher, they make themselves to be naturally lower, so that in this context, the vampires rule over the sheep, or the sheep try to become new vampires, and the cycle continues, as above, so below. Assuming there must be a process, or a command, or necessary violence in application of the political power also implies that man has a ritual in order to further attempt to hold his authority, and that it is much unlike the Tao Te Ching, where the only process embraced would be nature. This is why in Taoism, the natural or the Zuran, the self-regulating intelligence of the world, is brought upon by the Wu Wei, or the effortless. Man is not being effortless or letting people live their own lives by claiming jurisdiction or ownership over nature, needing to justify many man-made rituals and create words to change perceptual meanings in order to make it seem more and more legitimate or natural. All man ends up doing is making the already complex natural world more complex to the point of confusion for perpetual ignorance, fear, and control. Another justification for government may be made when the ignorance is embraced and individuals think to themselves that they have to learn their man-made rights, or that there are experts who know more than them about the man-made system, so to make it seem as if it is backed by knowledge, so to be natural and trusted in existence. Will mankind truly empower themselves? If one cares for nature, all one must do is ask themselves the simple question: how long has government existed? No, not just the idea of government, but the actual idea brought into existence. The first form of government, Sumeria, was the first form of systemic slavery. The simple structure of a priest class thought to have the divine right to rule, and slaves who must earn their freedom, with it being called enfranchisement or manumission, as further detailed in reading Slavery Gone for Good, Modern Abolitionism. As history has shown, no government lasts and no government fulfills. Every government violates, never protects, and always results in chaos, in the form of democide, the top cause of unnatural death. Yet, for how obvious the top cause of unnatural death may sound, people continually believe the unnatural aggregate will not result in death or chaos, and will actually rather result in the natural. To say it would be chaos without such a denaturing system is to say that it would be chaos without chaos, that slavery and violence in an unnatural aggregate is necessary for freedom, order, or peace. That which people truly desire is the natural aggregate. Yet, governments call their process of becoming a citizen or subject as naturalization. When you are born on the land that they arbitrarily claim, you are naturalized. When you fill out the paperwork that they arbitrarily created, you are naturalized. However, this has nothing to do with nature or helping to create the natural. As if the illusion is not strong enough, natural eyes means to make, be, or do the natural. Calling the process of citizenship as naturalization makes it seem as if it is natural to be under a government when people who are simply born into the world and propagated into the government have not even given their explicit consent. The same goes with the constitutions of governments. These are social contracts that you never personally signed. They tell you that you are obligated to follow it, yet it's just a piece of paper that supposedly applies to hundreds to millions of people, with its arbitrary rules broken all the time. Many of the most corrupt or tyrannical countries in the world have had constitutions, yet they always fail to prevent evil, often doing the exact opposite of what they were intended to do. The abolitionist Lysander Spooner details how we never gave our consent in his document titled No Treason, the Constitution of No Authority. As if it was the writing down that slavery is illegal that made it immoral, people assume paper has the power or authority to alter nature. It isn't some contract you personally signed, but again, people assume as if it is, so to make it seem natural. The illusion of any man-made thing seeming natural has caused great deception and evil in history when people aren't able to see and embrace the natural beyond it. People attach themselves to these things dependent upon them for their natural nature. They make themselves the slaves, with mental slavery as such being considered the most dangerous form by many writers. If the mind is enslaved, so will come to be the body and world. If you give yourself freedom and you are comfortable with it, but yet you still live in illusion where freedom is in the hands of others and you are not totally free, as with limited government, it is more dangerous than overt tyranny because the denaturing is not so obvious and therefore it is embraced. In the same way, people who think their voice or vote is added into the government, that they have a contract or constitution, that it is a system made up of relatable people, of wise individuals of the past, or that it is how society has always been functioning, then you think of how it could work if done in a certain way. These all make governments appear natural. Among this, another simple reason people are fooled into this illusion is because they assume the more freedom as nature, and therefore with a lack of grounding principle, they are willing to accept it until it inevitably grows to tyranny again. It does not have to be embraced, but it will be if one does not see nature's government. Some may even think they can balance government, as if it has a time and place of its own. But if it's unnatural and it's slavery, then there's no time and place. It would be akin to a problem that can be mostly entirely prevented. The politician who partakes in government affairs of any kind makes change dependent upon him. He asks to be man-made authority. In the process, he may even become a celebrity-like influence upon peoples, despite how it's not merely for influence, it's for authority, making him once more deceitful, as the unnatural is seemingly natural because influencers, leaders, and organizers may always persist in nature. There becomes ego and attachment to the arbitrarily endless political ideologies and attention one receives in the process, where the influence may first provide so many seemingly naturalizing effects, it may appear as if it is the right thing to do, although directly justifying a man-made system of authority with its denaturing effects, becoming more and more consumed into the man-made world. You may simply observe the actions of any politician, what they wear and how they try to appeal to people by every means possible, begging for money and votes, how they are known for being dishonest, not just to people, but in this case to nature itself. They lie to their own nature by putting themselves in an unnatural position, or by trying to be somebody they are not. Many actively learn how to persuade people and use the right gestures and catchphrases, all as a means of indoctrination and bandwagon for their authority. Notice what appeals to people the most: the genuine-looking character, what people desire, whether it's a mother-like figure or father-like figure, a protector or nurturer, all unaddressed traumas or excuses used to undermine nature. Furthermore, an insecurity or trauma may be the very purpose for an individual seeking out power or control over others or nature to begin with. May it also attract psychopaths or sociopaths, or the worst of characters of the sort in addition. Insecurity feeding insecurity, fear of losing government feeding fear of losing power. People desiring freedom, yet receiving the exact opposite every time. What a system humans have built. From an alien's perspective, as done with the animations by Man Against the State's Graham Wright, it becomes evident that humans don't know what they are doing. This is a game they've been trying to figure out but can't, although they invented it, because it is to topple the already game of life or nature. It's like asking, how can we create a system that becomes people's reality, so that way they are dependent on us, trying to find a way to reinvent reality, which, it being an invention, can only ever be based on some whim or opinion, with endless forms of man-made political doctrine that never seems to work. If we take government as just another invention that needs more work, it may also appear natural to us, except it is still involuntary and doesn't serve any function other than to hinder natural functions, mask unnatural functions, along with restricting freedoms and different solutions. The word constitution is just another word for nature, and people say we must always uphold the Constitution. Indeed we do, but it isn't man-made by definition. The only must or always is nature. The constitution of man is what makes him, what constitutes him. Nature makes him, as that is what naturalization really means, if you can see past the illusions created by government. When nature is embraced, it means nature's government is in the aggregate. It means you are naturalized in nature. People may do wrong within such a system, but the aggregate of nature would not permit their wrongdoing to grow, simply because nobody would give the wrongdoing power to grow, as nobody would believe in man-made authority. In addition, the rules or natural laws would be expressed in nature, such as that of voluntarism, the non-aggression principle, karma, or the hermetic principles. How could one be afraid of potential chaos in order to face it, because wrongdoing will always be created? Problems are natural to occur. We simply need to know how to prevent them from growing. People would be obligated to be responsible, to teach morality, not authority. When governments call their rules as laws, they are ignorant of morality, as well as any such thing as natural laws or principles. Governments give criminals the power to do wrong on mass scale. They give anyone more power than they would otherwise have, than they are meant to have. We have it in our nature to learn and guide, and nature will teach us. Yet we create governments that we think should be the teacher, although it would be an authoritarian one at best, and therefore not a teacher but a dictator. This is again why rulers cannot be leaders, why rulers cannot be the rules. If a man-made law aligns to natural law, it is irrelevant since it already exists. Whereas if it is against natural law, then it shall be disobeyed. Either way, it is unfit to exist. People don't learn their lesson or what is truly right or wrong if their life is ran by pieces of paper and other individuals through governments telling them what to do simply because it is told of them to do so, simply because of their authority. Quote, if man should attempt to alter or supplement nature, creating dependency onto it or him, this creates man-made authority. End quote. If an individual were to inquire the government of nature, natural government, or God, it would be what is given to us. It would be natural authority, the rules. It must be followed because it cannot be changed. Natural authority is the only true authority. Truth or morality is authority, negating any concept of authority. It is whether we want it to be or not, as nature with time tells all truth. There is no ruler when we have rules that urge us and teach us how to rule ourselves. Nature is not just naturalization, the law, or constitution, it is also defined as order, for which those yelling chaos are simply unwilling to work with or recognize. Those who believe in government will claim it's necessary for order, again assuming the man-made necessary for the natural. How will humans ever get along with one another without authority? oh my, I wonder, it must have nothing to do with morality or the natural. Every excuse made against the abolition of chattel slavery is virtually the same or similar to that of the abolition of government, where the worries of the economy and chaos is brought forward due to fear. Order in nature may not appear perfect to you, as you may look around the world and want people to act in certain ways. But if you keep yourself in order, you will not impose chaos upon anyone by becoming or promoting an authority to fulfill a man-made version of order. People can learn to accept others, or at least not use violence if they think their ideas are so just. As everything in nature, humans are self-organizing, and as morality, naturality increases in the very first place to abolish government, as rules are necessary for no rulers, peoples will create order among themselves. The market of ideas will come together and compete, as everything does in nature, and there would be no monopoly for just one solution, as it is in the case of government. The only thing you truly can sort out anyways is your own life. Instead of trying to change others, thinking externally to across the world and in places out of your natural control, people can better themselves in their own pocket of the world, that of which is in their natural control. You don't live other people's lives. You don't know what they are going through. They are on their own trajectory. Who are you to tell them what to do, as all you ever can do is guide someone, if you respect who they are as an individual self. Similar to that of the idea of constitution, nature is the only state or condition for that of all the earth. When government calls itself the state, it presumes to act like it is existence, the condition of life itself being bound to it. It is similar to say nobody is above the law, as if the man-made law is natural law. The belief in government is often known to be called statism, that which creates the state. People may not pick up on this language, but these terms only make people associate government with society, with life and nature, a reality inescapable. While one may debate upon terms, the context is of the most relevance. A natural government or state would just be nature. Therefore, whatever word preference you choose, it all comes down to the core distinction in morality, right versus wrong, the natural versus the unnatural. If ignorance or belief is the excuse for keeping an unnatural system, it isn't, because ignorance and belief is dispelled by knowledge or moral suasion, which comes from learning nature. Upon optionally using the nature dynamic and learning the nature of government based on our knowledge, the intended use or function, simple or true nature, may be said for peace, security, or protection. The requirements based nature are from political action, violence, law, the belief in authority, that of what it is made, core nature, of people, pieces of paper, buildings. The impacts or effects, the second natures, can be the nature of tyranny, democide, debate, superiority, inequality, imposed opinions. The type is general nature and organization. The greater function or use, the higher nature, is for a better place, a place without chaos. Together, for peace, security, or protection from political action, violence, law, the belief in authority, of people, pieces of paper, buildings, can be the nature of tyranny, democide, debate, superiority, inequality, imposed opinions, an organization for a better place, a place without chaos. Now, upon this assessment, which you may very well expand upon, check for any contradictions or connections, such as the fact an organization is based on violence, uses violence for peace, or the fact it uses opinion, which can alter any of the answers. Does it always use violence for peace? If it's made of just people, why is there a belief in authority? We may even ask, in what place does it function? You may notice that the word law can be broken down separately for more context, likely to lead us back to opinion, creating more connections that help us see what government really is. We see the function is security or peace, yet it isn't so clearly defined among our analysis how that would be done. If we think of a way that could be done, we may assess that and check back. For concepts as large as this idea, it can take more assessments to get to the heart of what it is. However, whether it is law, war, tyranny, democide, inequality, a sole or centralized source of security, paper or people having abnormal power, or legitimate violence, it all leads back to the belief in authority for these to be even possible. Nature would be unimaginable without government for peoples who never saw that the natural world was here all along. If government is such a necessity, then you must not be able to live your life without it. But wait, you can, and most people can and would. Look around you and ask yourself, is it really some people in their suits and ties or other fancy outfits and titles, some pieces of paper holding together society in order? Does the jail systems, the school systems, the police systems, the regulatory systems ever truly help us? Do they help us gain freedom or reduce freedom, learn more or learn less, become more healthy or less healthy? Who is it that must make the world better and protect freedom? Everyone. The idea of protecting property relies on all of us, not some select class. It's all just people. It's all it ever was. People can organize. They do not need violence to do so. Nature has stayed the same. It appears relatively similar to what it has always been, the same earth our ancestors lived on. We live with advances in technology, in medicine, vocabulary, the ability to spread education. From security cameras and alarm systems to the ability to network anywhere at any time, to create media and express ourselves in any way, to the century-long calls for mass education, to ending chattel slavery, and yet do we still need the old barbaric practice of governments, that which ever founded or maintained any form of systemic slavery? If humanity wants to evolve, we can do a lot better than living with a perpetual necessary evil, accepting the fact we shouldn't have self-ownership or self-responsibility, or the ability to teach others and nurture them naturally as nature intended. Let all the medicine show, let all the people express themselves and live out their passions. Let the small businesses grow. Let the child imagine without deception. Let the child grow without confusion. Let violence be known as evil, governments as an usurpation of nature. People will say that they have no choice but to live under governments, but you do have a choice. You create them. The idea that you don't have a choice is the very problem. It is disrespectful to your own nature because you always have the choice. You are not to be or succumb to be a slave, nor make others as slaves. Will you accept nature as the answer always present, or have government be the answer? Government justifies violating the individual for the collective, and in the case of taxation or theft, it guarantees that everyone's property gets stolen to supposedly prevent possible denaturing, possible property theft. Just like any lie, it leads to and justifies the unknown. Just like any attachment to the unnatural, it leads to or justifies the unnatural. Yet, this belief in authority is not just a lie, belief in superstition. It can only ever be the biggest lie, belief in superstition, as it really is just a presumption that man can be nature in every way possible, nonetheless anyway. It gives people the power to destroy other people's lives, yet people believe in it so much to carry out its orders, and it isn't even an identifiable or tangible thing. It doesn't even provide an essential resource. It can only take from what already exists, steal from some people to provide for other people, including for its own existence. It will steal people's money and use it to fund its own army, to continue stealing from people's. According to its logic, the simple pen and paper can justify the mass slaughter of populations. It is a set of buildings, wait. A set of people, wait. A set of documents, wait. It's a deceptive mafia. Either way, it's just human beings. Actually, you and I believing that other human beings have authority. We all must grow up eventually as a whole species. As it has not always existed, it cannot exist to persist. As it violates by its nature, it cannot be used for nature. As people must be indoctrinated or mentally enslaved for its very existence, it does not naturally occur. Government can only ever be an unnatural aggregate. Governments essentially claim to be nature itself. If you aren't in control of you, if nature isn't your ruler, it must be someone who proclaims to be authority. In order for governments to exist, authority must be seen as legitimate and therefore natural. If nature isn't your government, then your government is unnatural. A quote by Epictetus: "Is freedom anything else than the right to live as we wish? Nothing else." Chapter 3: Anarchy. Anarchy is a world without authority. From Greek anarchon, no rulers, just as monarchy from monoarchon means one ruler. Anarchy does not mean no rules, it means no rulers. The idea of rulers implies that of authority, governments. The idea of rules implies that of morality, ownership, principle, or law. If one were to inquire upon a world of law without government, or morality without legality, rules without rulers, the source of rules must not be man, even if it is man who applies them. If legality was morality, then it would simply be morality. If law or government was natural law, then it would simply be nature. If rulers were rules, then they would not be rulers. However, the rulers proclaim that they are the source of rules, as if you need rulers for rules, as if morality needs legality. This assumes that rulers are natural. However, as by studying the nature of government and authority previously, we see they cannot and must not be. The attempt for the rulers to be the rules, is the very problem, as it is for the unnatural to be natural. It is evident within nature that there are rules to our existence, even for mere social order or among people's businesses and property. These rules are timeless and universal, discovered among learning from our nature. For instance, knowing that you own yourself and that others cannot own you is a rule that you acquired by the nature of beings. It didn't take a ruler to tell you that you own yourself, for even if they did, they cannot change nature, the inherent rules, order, or constitution of life. The laws of inertia, thermodynamics, cause and effect cannot be changed. These are considered natural laws, which must be followed. The word law even means an existing condition which is binding and immutable, meaning it cannot be changed. In light of this definition, man-made law is merely an illusion of natural law, an opinion at best. When we learn of these laws, we follow them more, otherwise we may get hurt or cause unexpected or unintended reactions. For instance, one can jump off a cliff and assume no consequence, but the laws of nature dictate what will occur whether humans like it or not. When natural law is also spoken of, or in the lens of principle, such as that of the non-aggression principle or voluntarism, it may relate to how humans engage in social behavior or property rights. Most people know that it is wrong to violate others. This is a rule they live with because if they did not, they would not maintain good relationships with others and society would condemn them. If an individual owns their shoe because they worked for it and paid for it, or they have their own business, they maintain ownership over their property by ensuring that they have control over it, meaning that they maintain rules. They are not imposing rules for others' property, only for their own property. If they want to have rules with others for the same property, they work with them but not making them follow their rules by the threat of violence. They are voluntary. Most people will settle situations without violence as a prerogative, as it would be most productive for the mere rule of living life naturally. It has been similarly said as the golden rule, karma, moral law, law of attraction, do no harm, the Tao, virtue, universally preferable behavior, and the list goes on. These would all have no value if legality was the sole arbiter of morality. The whole existence of these is based on knowledge and experience over time, for which time tells all truth in nature. Although karma may not always work spontaneously, or people may not always be able to defend one another on the spot, with morality upheld, the laws or principles of nature will be embraced in the aggregate. If there is a dispute between two peoples, they may have a third party help settle it between them, but that third party isn't the sole judge for everyone. This also creates a market incentive for more people to judge fairly and offer help. It may be said that nobody is above the natural law. No one person gets to decide how everything works for everyone else, as one should always strive to determine what is right. If it's right one day and wrong the next, then find what is right in the next. If it's right for one person but wrong for another, then find what is right for another. This is time and place, a world of nature always awaiting our rightful embrace so that we may live on in order and harmony with it. These are taught as rules by others, not something that is created into the world by any government or ruler. The only exception to this is when they are acting as an authority. People will believe it is right or necessary to violate others. Therefore, the exception to rules come as the consequence of rulers imposing their will or opinion as the rules, or as people believing in the whole notion of rulers, that of man-made authority. People can do wrong, but they will not be able to continue unless people allow their wrongdoing through the belief in authority. Even those who proclaim to be rulers are subject to the laws of nature or rules of the mass public. This all amounts to the fact that rules are superior to any idea of rulers, if people were to embrace them. There must be trust in the fact that people will eventually learn to know how to act, and therefore we must allow people to learn to know how to act, even sharing it with them in the form of moral suasion. When they cross the line, being that they harm or come to affect others, then peoples may be at the defense of the victim. If one wants to hire some private security, different organizations for different means will grow, but there will be no monopoly for one service, unlike the involuntary government services. It was no surprise when Lysander Spooner attempted to set up his own post office, he was shut down by the government so that they can have a monopoly on postage, although his competition lowered the prices overall. One can only imagine how many companies or businesses with good products did not survive through taxation, government demands, and monopolies, how much innovation the world could have had. In this light, rulers have kept hidden the rules that may help the world, and this would make sense if we consider the fact knowledge is power, whereas rulers are an unnatural power that requires violating individuals, keeping them in ignorance and fear of their true or better nature, so to keep them dependent on or enslaved by those imposing upon them. Rulers want to maintain an unnatural naturalization, to feed on the powerless while contributing to their ignorance of real powers, such as that of individual conscience and decision-making, to keep their own man-made power. Whereas rules of nature helps us to naturalize into the real world, helping all individuals understand their own real power. Yet, people will claim anarchy is utopian or impractical and not the real world. This is perfect for the unnatural. If everyone deserves freedom, everyone deserves knowledge. The rules shall be known by all who play the game of life, so that way no people are their pawns. For why rules are relevant to the idea of no rulers, it is because it is the requirement. Anarchy requires the self-control of individuals. Since it is in the nature of individuals to be in control of themselves, then nature equally requires the self-control of individuals. If an individual were to fear their freedom and be ignorant of its real requirements, they will never truly attain it. This would be the goal of those who want to remain as authority, to convince the masses of people that freedom is dangerous and therefore should not be embraced, that anarchy means chaos when it does not. However, such a deception would make sense from a system that seeks to replace nature or anarchy itself. In addition, if individuals never see true freedom as a possibility to be imagined, it will be difficult to ever create it. However, freedom does not need to be created. It needs to be allowed, because nature is the only need and allowance, and nature provides us all with freedom. We may have to play by the rules of nature, but so long as we do, we are considered free. Once we impose man-made involuntary rules or enslave one another, that is when we are no longer considered free. Freedom is the exact antithesis of slavery. To say you are enslaved to nature, it negates the idea of slavery. Just as it is to say nature is your government, it negates the idea of government. Since anarchy means no rulers, no government, and you really are born into the world of nature, of no title or imaginary lines or documentation, anarchy is nature. You may live in a world which does believe in using the man-made to attain freedom. However, the freedom it will achieve will not be anarchy. It will be a false form of freedom, making it as dangerous as lies mixed with truth to make the lie more appealing, the unnatural seemingly natural. Even if one used firearms for self-defense, it's not the firearm that creates the freedom. It's the education or rule behind it for why it is used by a natural human being in preventing violators of nature. The man-made can never truly fulfill the natural, no matter how much it attempts. Paperwork and man-made rituals concerning freedom is therefore meaningless, because freedom by definition means not being morally or naturally obligated to use any one thing for it. Freedom means infinite possibility, the ability to live your life as you wish so long as you do not cross others' freedoms. One can choose to be a pacifist or non-resistant, have no security. One can choose to have a commune where products are shared among people. One can choose everything for their own life because it's their own. People can freely choose who they want to associate with, but nobody is having to comply against their will. Otherwise, that would be government. That would assume rulers. Since it is in the nature of everybody to make their own decisions and associate, as it's their own body, their freedom is natural and they have no ruler but themselves. Anarchy is therefore freedom so much as it is nature. To fear it simply because it is told of us to fear it, when we practice it every day by voluntary interactions, except in the case of authority, it is mere ignorance. If attaining no rulers means you rule yourself, internal monarchy, that means you are free, external anarchy. If you've always ruled yourself and you simply gave way into the belief that you do not, then it's just the matter of unraveling all the veils of ignorance or deception keeping you from your own freedom, ultimately your own self. Most people desire freedom. It is their source of fun, health, and happiness in all matters of life. If every individual is free from the chains of another, recognizing why and protecting why, as there would be with no rulers and only rules, then there becomes anarchy in the aggregate. The so-called state of nature is even said to be anarchy, yet nature is another word for constitution and order. Humans will start hurting each other just because there isn't a ruling class, writing something on a piece of paper miles and miles away, or a centralized monopoly on defense. To assume humans will do nothing about any problems is quite silly, especially as we can see how powerful technology has come to assist in the efforts of sharing knowledge, creating transparency, and holding people accountable. Indeed, we can use the man-made to prevent the unnatural, because the man-made is not inherently unnatural. We will always create and do things. We simply do not need to violate nature in order to do so. Those who justify authority or rulership justify endless violations against nature, as it represents the unnatural aggregate. The whole concept of authority proclaims to be nature itself, that man can do whatever with no repercussion. The idea of authority is virtually the same in that of the criminal or man with bad intent who thinks he can justify violating nature for his benefit or out of his own internal problems. Notice, the intent to do something wrong comes directly thereof the lack of rules, for this is where confusion, internal anarchy, leads an individual to carry out wrong acts. One may feel sympathy for this individual, as they may have had bad or unnatural experiences leading them to do bad or unnatural things in response. It won't seem bad to the person doing it, but because they know no better, that's why they do it. With moral suasion and learning the rules, individuals like this may be helped. However, if instead one insists that they follow the rulers, they will never learn what is actually right. They may even rebel further due to the pressures or further confusion. When we put ourselves in our old shoes, as well as other individuals, we see the shared sense of humanity and nature found within everyone. Seeking out the freedom that each individual desires and helping them achieve so as by rules, not rulers, will help the world tremendously. What makes anarchy helpful is not merely because it is natural, but because the possibility of chaos within is a teacher even without moral suasion. With authority, the chaos through violence and slavery is guaranteed, affecting large populations even seen as moral or natural or necessary. Whereas, if any chaos were to occur as mere possibility in nature and anarchy, there would not be mass bloodshed, wars, despite how conflicts may always persist, and the chaos would be seen as immoral or unnatural or unnecessary. Think of the scenario where everyone is doing their thing, minding their own business, but one person acts out of hand. They harm someone. Everyone will see the person doing the harm as wrong, having disturbed the natural flow of society and people socially coming together. People are obligated to be responsible and take care of that situation, so to help bring peace back, not wait around for some authority to take care of it for them, negating any natural need of responsibility. Now think of the same scenario, except people wait for an authority. Or better yet, perhaps the authority was the very one doing the harm. People would assume it is among the natural flow of society, since they trust the authority. The matter of trust is much so the matter of what people perceive to be natural, right, or moral. The truth is, nobody should trust an authority. People should trust morality, good actions, and good people, regardless of man-made illusory titles and positions, and therefore always do the right thing and at all times be ready to do the right thing. This is what anarchy not only obligates people to do, this is what is required to create anarchy. Rules enforces rules. Nature enforces nature. Humans enforces humans. All is where it should be in their natural time and place. Rulers are not the rules. Governments are not nature. Authority is not human. Reading The End of All Evil by Jeremy Locke even mentions that there is no such thing as anarchy, and this would be true if we assume it is simply nature. The notion of government is illusory in usurping nature, but so is the word anarchy in describing nature, since if it is freedom, and that is everywhere, then equally so it becomes null and void, only to exist due to the lack thereof, just like the very notion of the natural. Upon optionally using the nature dynamic and learning the nature of anarchy based on our knowledge, the intended use or function, the simple or true nature, may be said as for living without rulers. The requirements or base nature are from freedom, no politics. That of what it is made, the core nature, is of the natural world. The impacts or effects, the second nature, can be the nature of voluntarism, tolerance, possibility, self-ownership. The type is general nature, a social system. The greater function or use, higher nature, is for a better place, a place without chaos. Together, for living without rulers, from freedom, no politics, of the natural world, can be the nature of voluntarism, tolerance, possibility, self-ownership, a system for a better place, a place without chaos. Now, upon this assessment, which you may very well expand upon, check for any contradictions or connections. What makes this different from our assessment on government is the fact anarchy can be strictly defined as no rulers, whereas government can be of many different forms, all pertaining to rulers. How could one describe all of what anarchy looks like if it has no particular form or politics? If it's of the natural world and doesn't really have a function, just a meaning, then it may seem redundant. It's for a world without chaos, the same as the function for government, yet so we assume. From the meaning or common interpretations of the word, there could be many assumptions, yet if we were to separately assess the word freedom and relate it to the Greek roots of anarchy, we'd likely see a connection that we cannot ignore. When nature is found, we know we are on the right track. If we assess that of which isn't of nature, of course we will have confusion and contradiction. Or, if we compare such to that of nature to assess, of course we will find redundancy or ourselves trying to find meaning of that which could be self-evident. Learning about anarchy is a good example of apophasis, learning what is from learning what is not. In the same way, we may understand what is right or natural from knowing what is wrong or unnatural. All the many scenarios imagined are covered in What Anarchy Isn't by Larkin Rose. Much like time, anarchy has not only proven itself through time with countless forms of governments rising and falling to the top source of unnatural death, it also heals all aggregate wounds over time when embraced. All the mass corruption, mass wars, mass crime, mass poverty will fade with time, as people come to their evolved state, their self-responsibility and self-ownership, their promotion of knowledge and consciousness, all the hidden truths and facts about our world coming to the surface after many years of suppression. Man will no longer place a box over nature in his attempts to be God or nature. Man will find his place for himself without imposing his will on others to dictate their place when it will ever be out of place, because it is not man's place to rule over another man. Anarchy has always existed beyond all political systems, therefore it is natural to exist. Being that it is already present at all times and will always show itself through the need of freedom, it is naturally occurring. Being that human beings naturally have the ability to rule themselves, and that prevents violations of nature or denaturing to begin with, it is natural to use, as it is to embrace. Being that anarchy is therefore natural, there is no need to identify ourselves to an identity or ism such as anarchist or anarchism, as it is to realize mere humanity, nature, and freedom. This would also include the colors and supposed factions, adding man-made illusions which may thwart an otherwise natural imperative with attachment away from our unique selves. We are all meant to live as we please. Nature wants us to live in anarchy in a voluntary world free from slavery and free, period. A quote from Leo Tolstoy: "Even if the absence of government really did mean anarchy in a negative, disorderly sense, which is far from being the case, even then no anarchical disorder could be worse than the position to which government has led humanity." Chapter 4: Suasion. Moral suasion is that which creates and maintains the end of the unnatural. It is the end of governments or authority and the embrace of anarchy or no rulers, the embrace of the natural, the rules. From Old French suasion and Latin suasionem, a recommending, advocacy, support, and from suadere, to urge, incite, promote, advise, persuade. To bring people to their senses, helping them to understand the natural world and self, is to utilize moral suasion, otherwise known as natural suasion or naturalization. As a term originally used during the abolition of chattel slavery, the abolitionists understood that in order for any peoples to be free, they must have rules or knowledge concerning their self. They must be inspired and see that morality and nature is above all human forms of authority. To rise to their own authority over their own self or in alignment to nature's authority. Such an effort for abolishing chattel slavery, a practice done for thousands of years that everyone partakes in, would require a deep and widespread moral persuasion. For what abolitionism is, it's an action and movement, meaning to abolish something, and in a deeper philosophical context, it would mean to get rid of what does not belong, what is contrary to nature, what is not natural. To know of nature may seem like a whole separate conversation as opposed to helping a denatured world know of nature, yet the denatured world is only a consequence of the knowledge not being shared or embraced. Therefore, the real only solution would be education, which may take many forms. The word education comes from exducere, to lead out or bring out, particularly out of ignorance or confusion. Yet, government assumes that their authority is leadership, when their own power rests on the idea that others do not have that power, that their own knowledge is knowledge others do not have, and that they have the power to change the world rather than allow or bring out the natural world. By suppressing the power of other people and nature, they attempt to give themselves power with authority which nature never provided to them. Rulers proclaim to be the source of rules and order, an immoral or unnatural suasion, making nature or morality dependent upon man in his mere opinion, making an individual's own conscience solely dependent upon another. Since rulers claim to do this, then the knowledge of rules would be about the ruler. It would be knowledge of political systems. However, as these systems are unnatural, this knowledge is mere illusion, ignorance. With more unnatural suasion in the form of violence to make people comply, the unnatural systems may be further attempted. If moral suasion instead is encouraged, people are empowered to be the change rather than be dependent on others to be the change for them. Their nature gets to express, not be suppressed. They don't need to ask for permission to be free or to express their natural nature. They never needed to, because nature is the only need. Government was an unnatural creation assumed to be natural. Therefore, to assume the action is changing the government in any way possible is still legitimizing the unnatural and immoral. You can only attempt to change the unnatural, but you must allow the natural if you expect any natural result such as freedom or anarchy. To assume anarchy comes from government, no authority comes from authority, the natural comes from the unnatural, is the very notion of changing government, which is the very thing that changes and claims to be nature. Moral suasion means to allow nature, to align man's nature to that of nature's government. It doesn't make people invest their own natural energies into one or few peoples to create rulers solely responsible for all the rules. It helps people invest their own natural energies into their own self and those they love to create the world that they personally want to live in. It is what it means to know thyself. What do you know best? It is the knowledge of nature, and this knowledge is the real power, just as it is leadership, because it is nature which we all must obey. To share knowledge is education. To encourage education is moral suasion. In light of abolitionism, moral suasion is the integration or education of the natural for the abolition of the unnatural. For everyone to have that knowledge is for everyone to have the power and lead themselves. There will be decentralization for nature, but there will be unity. However, if it is kept for few, then so will the power and leadership. There will be centralization for government, but there will be division, divide and conquer. A people's never content, never embracing nature will always be at war or in division, as lies lead to confusion, government class systems create inequality. Whereas, for peoples who are content, always embracing nature, knowledge leads to direction and an individual's own conscience is respected, helping individuals to unite in the shared sense of humanity, equality. Moral suasion is that which manifests the natural aggregate. Ending chattel slavery, for instance, was not a mere opinion, it was a destiny for all of humankind, recognized by those who knew the inherent truth or natural nature in self-ownership. One may inquire upon what morality there is to promote, but morality is just another word for neutrality, nature. If it is evident that 1 + 1 = 2, or that you breathe for you, then so it is correct and moral, natural and healthy, right and real, among many other terms to describe the same truth. Moral suasion, like the word anarchy or the natural, is most necessary in the attempted presence of the unnatural. Otherwise, not much persuasion would be necessary for an individual who recognizes nature as an authority self-evidently to follow at all times. The act of sharing education or moral suasion rests in bringing the very knowledge of what is nature in relation to government to all the world, persuading people to see the government beyond all governments that you have had to see for yourself. It is sharing the nature of nature itself, of the belief in authority and anarchy or voluntarism. You are not to only share your own experience or the knowledge. You want people to find nature for themselves, for which is why moral suasion is merely the individual opening up their own eyes, the natural being allowed. Only they can open up their own eyes, just as only they can know thyself. They shall do this since their nature depends upon their use of the natural for their very existence. Nature cannot remain nature without the natural. We will see a world we can't know without it. Our eyes would be closed and we would walk ourselves off a cliff. The desired world would be unattainable, or the world we create would be unintended. Helping an individual see their own path as such is walking them through their own steps. Are they sure they know where they are going? Are they taking the necessary or natural steps? As we have walked the path ourselves, or we see the path that they walk, but we cannot walk for them, all we can do is ask questions. When we ask questions, we are sharing a thought with someone, allowing them to express, and for ourselves to connect with the individual, with where they are currently at in their own life. It is the very method which allows radical honesty. It is also known as the Socratic method, or Larkin Rose's Candles in the Dark method. For us to understand nature in the very first place, the constitution or order of life, we as beings coming into its presence must think, reflect, and therefore ask questions. When we ask, as by every action we partake from every thought, nature answers our call, giving us consequences, continually calling us toward the answers. If we get hurt doing one thing, we know to do something else. All this process of experimentation and learning, nature persuades us to know the truth, and we may persuade others to know what nature taught us. We become merely messengers. It is therefore not that we are to simply persuade about the natural or moral, but that our persuasion itself is natural or moral, recognizing the individual must think for themselves and come to their own conclusions. Those who partake in this also don't need to persuade everyone, or even those involved in the unnatural, as nature will do the ultimate persuasion. You shall simply do your best and plant the seed. But realize that all it takes is a certain amount of caring individuals to make a difference, to the point where the unnatural can no longer be enforced or upheld. The caring will attract to the caring. Those who partake in the natural will manifest the natural. The energy of the loud and passionate minority cannot be ignored for long. For instance, with moral suasion or morale, many politicians, cops, or people in governmental activities will step down, but not all of them. However, combining that with the fact more people are unwilling to obey what of government does exist, the unnatural system will be much harder to maintain. In addition, the alternative, natural and voluntary systems may greatly appeal to individuals. Those who partake the role of authority are very few compared to the many that believe in their legitimacy. We must find the heart in every human being, which is where the beauty in an individual is found. Many of the abolitionists who partook in moral suasion did not use politics and did not want a war. They realized that the government acted as the moral victor for ending chattel slavery, when it was actually the efforts of abolitionists educating the public that ever prompted and aggregated such a natural change. How could government ever partake in moral suasion if it, by definition, uses immorality with its persuasion based on the threat of violence, based on the idea that one should simply follow orders because it is told of them to do so by authority? Voting for an authority reinforces the very idea of authority. Therefore, anyone that votes or wants any form of government cannot claim to care for freedom or nature. In other words, if one votes, from Latin votum, pledge, dedication, vow, for morality or naturality, by way of sharing knowledge, then one cannot be voting for any legality or government. Laws are not backed by knowledge, they are backed by violence and opinion, followed by the belief in authority. Let it be known that government can never partake in a moral cause. It must be purely a philosophical and educative effort of minds connecting with other minds. From the mind and heart comes the actions, and from the actions comes the world resultant condition. The lie of authority is so strong, and the benefits of voluntary cooperation is so great, that it's just a matter of time for people to embrace what works for everyone and for all of time, as it is to live according to nature. Among education, there are many thousands of books or philosophies on every single topic, yet they all mostly either ignore nature or solemnly claim to know nature. The understanding of moral suasion for promoting the natural is based on what may be said as naturosophy, merely a form of philosophy with the open claim that you should think for yourself and be your own philosopher, and that this material is merely a guide for nature. Naturosophy, Sapientia Naturae the guidebook, is based entirely on questions for this reason. Arguably, the roots to all philosophy is anarchic in nature, since the love and ever-striving of knowledge that Socrates taught, or the natural embrace that Lao Tzu taught, or the stoicism of Epictetus and others only leads us to think for ourselves and question authority. If we were to consider abolitionism or moral suasion as a philosophy for the abolition of governments, continuing the movement of the past, it is merely the movement of natures against all that inhibits our nature. It is no surprise those who argued for changes in alignment with nature were referencing to laws of nature all throughout history, even if it were to deceitfully convince the populace to side with an unnatural system. One should inquire from nature for thyself. This would mean not only to detach from this material, which openly wants you to agree, but to detach from all material coming from governments, which actively makes you agree with them. As Ralph Waldo Emerson states, "The corruption of man is followed by the corruption of language, when simplicity of character and the sovereignty of ideas is broken up by the prevalence of secondary desires, the desire of riches, of pleasure, of power, and of praise, and duplicity and falsehood take place of simplicity and truth. The power over nature as an interpreter of the will is in a degree lost. New imagery ceases to be created, and old words are perverted to stand for things which are not. A paper currency is employed when there is no billion in the vaults. In due time, the fraud is manifest, and words lose all power to stimulate the understanding or affections. Hundreds of writers may be found in every long-civilized nation, who for a short time believe and make others believe that they see and utter truths, who do not of themselves clothe one thought in its natural garment, but who feed unconsciously on the language created by the primary writers of the country, those, namely, who hold primarily on nature." The power of questioning is not just the moral or natural path toward the moral or natural, but the most effective path due to it. The Socratic method of questioning can be applied to Socratic tutoring, seminars, therapy, in every aspect of life for any topic. It leads to an increased responsibility of answers, creating clarity upon direction. It also helps with inspiration, creativity, and critical thinking, even to gain expertise in speaking and engagement skills. there is a greater sense of value shared and found by an individual actively listening and genuinely curious about another individual. While the person asking the questions is a facilitator or teacher, they are also a coach, in that they join the conversation as an equal for the shared effort of a better humanity. Many people who understand a truth that others do not see may want to shout out on the rooftops and tell the whole world, then finding out that they should keep it to themselves because nobody seems to listen. The goal is to ask the right questions that help an individual find out the right answers for their right self. This means sticking to the idea of nature or morality when it comes to the idea of government, learning from the individual their thoughts concerning it, allowing them to get equally curious and not getting sidetracked when the importance is understood, holding ourselves accountable. When we escape our boxes, we see more and find out there is always more to figure out. This process of learning does not end. The admittance of ignorance is our step out of ignorance and toward knowledge, which is why we must always question everything, because even if we think we got something or someone figured out, there is always more to learn, helping us build a greater connection. This process of questioning is a practice, just as much as nature is a practice. Similarly, our nature or rights must be exercised if we are to be maintained or strengthened. A simple yet powerful example of Socratic questioning and dialogue is as follows. In math, you ask someone, "What is 2 plus 2?" and they respond 5. You remain calm, then give them the question that leads to their previously wrong answer by asking, "What is 3 plus 2?" allowing the individual to realize their own mistake or hypocrisy. If we were to apply this to the context of moral suasion for that of the belief in authority, when somebody answers one of your questions concerning anarchy or freedom as chaos, you may remain calm and proceed to give them the question that leads to their previously wrong answer by asking, "What does government create?" Genuinely curious to see if chaos is never an answer, or even asking, "What does anarchy mean when you break it down?" to help an individual see that chaos is an assumption, perhaps even asking questions related to that of chattel slavery in the past to relate it to the present, although most questions may be best kept at inquiring one's own belief system. If we put ourselves in the shoes of someone on a plantation, there are clearly more slaves than slave owners. The way out of the situation would require educating fellow slaves and inspiring them to act on their nature, which is not being enslaved. Otherwise, it is the only life they know and will come to accept as they fear the unknown. People may fear being wrong, or they do right assuming it is right when it is not. Navigating through the contradictions or shadows is a process much easier when one individual guides another, and contradiction or division becomes unity or alignment when questioning and dialogue opens us up and helps us gain clarity about everything. Some starting questions may be, what good things and what bad things occur with government? What specifically do you not like that the government does? What would you want funded? What do you think would happen to me if I didn't want to fund it? Should you disobey a law that conflicts with your own conscience? If it's bad for you to do a certain thing, is it okay for you to try to get someone else to do the same thing for you? Is it ever good to break the law? Does the majority have the right to do whatever it wants to a minority as long as it uses voting in the political process? Do you believe that it's okay for government to force you to fund things that you're opposed to? Otherwise, sharing material like this where other questions and resources were mentioned can assist in the effort. Time and patience is required, and bear in mind that not everybody comes to understand everything all at once. It takes some people a matter of a decade or two to finally understand these concepts, also depending on how much they care or how much programming they need to address within themselves. Planting the seed means that you leave an individual with thoughts that they have not previously considered, and you remain as someone they can talk to, or they have resources that they can learn more from. You may decide to break down larger questions into parts, or ask questions accordingly to what an individual cares about most, bringing it back down to nature as all must go. All materials which are reflections of the passionate and caring mind help share the word for moral suasion, despite how it must be the individual evaluating themselves one way or another. Philosophers have long battled the current norm of ideas throughout every century, trying to find out new ways of thinking or solutions to the world, often being penalized by governments for having done so, despite always being the real change makers. You are a philosopher if you have your own way of looking at the world. However, since everyone lives their own lives as such, everyone is a philosopher. Just as everyone is natural, it is simply a question as to if they will embrace it and learn more from themselves just as much as their world. The Tytler cycle developed by Alexander Tytler is representative for the philosophy of how society goes from tyranny to freedom again and again. From bondage to spiritual faith, from spiritual faith to great courage, from courage to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance to selfishness, from selfishness to complacency, from complacency to apathy, from apathy to dependence, and from dependence back into bondage. However, if we were to cut this cycle in half, what separates faith, courage, liberty, and abundance with complacency, apathy, dependence, and bondage is the idea of selfishness. In applying our knowledge of nature, government, and anarchy, we would realize that selfishness cannot go far into complacency, apathy, dependence, or bondage if the one or few individuals is not given their power by other individuals with the belief in authority. Nobody can be entitled to rule over others' property unless they make their title out to be legitimate and natural, moral, and necessary. Furthermore, both the Stanford Prison Experiments and the Stanley Milgram Experiments, as well as the top source of unnatural death known as democide, would all have a known solution, being the end of the belief in authority, the end of that which proclaims to take the place of nature. The man-made material world may still affect the natural world, but there wouldn't be an overarching man-made system proclaiming to have the power of nature itself, and that people see it as legitimate or natural to turn what is wrong or unnatural into what is right or natural. Humans don't have the power to change nature or reality. They have the power to change themselves and their creations. They must keep it at that. Whether it's voluntarism, Taoism, Stoicism, abolitionism, naturosophy, natural law, karma, the golden rule, or whatever moral philosophy, it all accounts to moral suasion so long as it is shared or allowed into being, not enforced by a government to take its place through legality, legislation, man-made constitutions, elections, etc. If your idea is so great, educate the world and prove it to them. The idea is worth applying voluntarily. In the same way real leaders are born, their actions worth emulating voluntarily. The internal ruler who has rules for thyself is sovereign, from Latin super regnum, above rulership. They are free by nature. They are not mentally enslaved by the belief in authority, for they do not need to believe. They know thyself. This mind made free will be impossible to enslave physically, and so the moral obligation for moral suasion rests on them to share the utterly profound truth they see evidently with their eyes clear and open, upon seeing or experiencing the unnatural world of darkness, of those who have external rulers who don't know thyself because they are slaves by government, mentally enslaving themselves through their belief in authority. Everything authority does is not education. If it isn't authority, then what is done is education. Authority is the exact opposite of education, for which it is merely violence, the violation of nature. Everything else is education. The result of authority is education, because authority never lasts, and nature does, to answer man's ignorance. But this is only when authority has shown its ugly face for what it is, evil itself, and that evil is shown to us when we have the natural eyes to see it, meaning authority no longer is seen as authority. Governments may persuade you to keep their rulership over you, but it can never be moral suasion unless they were talking to you as human beings, in which case they wouldn't be government. The false ideas about anarchy may similarly be used to persuade you against nature, but it can never be moral suasion unless they were talking to you as human beings, in which case you already have no rulers and nature is the only system or condition to embrace. You must stand by nature at all costs if you want the good, happy, and healthy, because life is nature and living is the natural. A quote from Seneca, "He who is brave is free." Your suasion involves a necessary sacrifice, indeed a natural one, which can only provide more of the natural. It means you are grounded in the roots, standing the test of time. You remain yourself and you want others to remain their self. You live your life and you want others to live their life. You violate nobody and you want others to violate nobody. You care for others and you want others to care for you. You love nature, or at least its knowledge and importance, and you want others to share the same beauty and benefit. You may not be able to save everybody, but by saving nature, you are. A quote from Marcus Aurelius, "Humans have come into being for the sake of each other, so either teach them or learn to bear them." Respect and teach nature. This is moral suasion and anarchy. This is you. Do not respect and teach authority. This is government. This is not you. The Nature is the Answer movement can be found on nita.one. The End of Slavery Summit, featuring over 50 different speakers and hundreds of resources, can be found on nita.one, the same website, /summit. The Liberator 2 News, where you can contribute articles and they will be turned into videos, everybody can collaborate, is found at theliberator.us. theliberator.us. And to learn more about Naturosophy as a whole and the whole book series, go to nita.one/Naturosophy. That's NATUROSOPHY. Thank you for giving my book your time and attention. Thank you for you. Nature is the answer. Love to all. This is Cory Edmund Endrulat narrating for Government is Unnatural, Anarchy is Natural, a practical analysis therein Naturosophy.